Here's a question worth sitting with. If Jesus had only 12 people to launch the largest movement in human history, what exactly did he tell them before he sent them out?
That is the question at the heart of Matthew chapter 10. And the answer turns out to be far more layered than most of us realize when we first read it.
Welcome to Matthew the King and His Kingdom, Portraits of Jesus. I am Jon, and with me as always is Lauren. We are in Lesson 5 today, titled Perpetuity, the King's Disciples, and our main text is Matthew chapter 10.
The word perpetuity in that title is doing a lot of work, Jon. The lesson aim is really about examining the instructions Jesus gave his disciples for spreading the message of the kingdom and figuring out what those instructions mean, not just for them, but for us right now.
And that word perpetuity, meaning something that continues indefinitely, is exactly the right lens. Because whatever Jesus set in motion in that chapter is still in motion. The movement launched by a handful of Galilean disciples became the largest religion in the world more than 2,000 years later.
Which, when you just say it out loud, is staggering. So let us set the scene a little, because Matthew 10 does not appear out of nowhere. It sits inside a much larger section that scholars sometimes call the Revelation of the King, which covers the first 10 chapters of Matthew.
Right? And within that big section, there are 3 segments. Chapters 1 through 4 reveal who Jesus is, his person. Chapters 5 through 7, the Sermon on the Mount, reveal his principles. And then chapters 8 through 10 reveal his power.
But here is what is interesting about how chapter 10 fits into the power section. In chapters 8 and 9, we saw Jesus performing miracle after miracle directly. Then chapter 10 shifts, and now the power is demonstrated through the disciples.
The lesson author is careful to say it is still ultimately through Jesus, because he is the one who empowers them. But the mode changes, and that change is significant because it signals the whole point of the chapter. Jesus is ensuring the mission will continue after he is gone.
And you can see that shift even in the vocabulary Matthew uses. In chapter 9, verse 1, he calls them disciples, which in Greek is mathetes, meaning learners. But by verse 2 of chapter 10, he shifts to apostles, which means those who are sent.
Learners become the sent, and that transition is set up beautifully by the very end of chapter 9. Let me read that. Matthew 9:37 and 38. Then he said to his disciples, "The harvest truly is plentiful, but the laborers are few. Therefore, pray the Lord of the harvest to send out laborers into his harvest."
Jesus tells them to pray for laborers, and then in the very next breath, he sends them. He is both the one who issues the call and the Lord of the harvest who answers it.
That symmetry is powerful. And then chapter 10 opens with the formal commissioning and the list of the 12, which Matthew records carefully by name. Matthew the tax collector lists himself 8th, almost humbly, we might say.
He does not put himself first. He is the author, and he buries himself in the middle of the list.
The lesson also gives us a really helpful outline for the whole chapter, and I think it is worth naming because it guides everything we are about to discuss. Verses 1 through 15 are instructions to past apostles, meaning the original 12 in their immediate historical context. Verses 16 through 23 are instructions to future apostles, those who will represent Jesus during future tribulation. And verses 24 through 42 are instructions to present disciples, which means us, the readers right now.
That 3-part structure is what keeps us from misapplying the chapter. Not everything Jesus says here is a direct command to every Christian in every age in exactly the same form. And yet all of it teaches us something important.
Exactly. And we should also note the caution the lesson raises. There is no evidence of a sustained healing and raising the dead ministry by the first disciples while Jesus was still on earth. Some of what Jesus commissions here finds its fuller expression in the book of Acts, and the miraculous authority of Matthew 10 was calibrated for that early era.
So we hold it carefully and thoughtfully. Okay, let us get into the questions, because there is a lot here. The first talk about it question asks, how does Matthew 10 pick up where Matthew 9 left off? And what are Jesus' instructions to his past disciples in verses 1 through 15? And what can we learn from them?
The connection between chapter 9 and chapter 10 is one of the tightest seams in the whole gospel. We already touched on the harvest prayer in 9:37 and 38, but there is another thread too. Matthew himself appears in chapter 9, verse 9 as a called disciple. And then in chapter 10, verses 2 through 4, he shows up in the list of the 12.
So the chapter is also personally connected for Matthew. He is narrating his own commissioning in a way.
Let me read the opening of chapter 10, so we have the actual commissioning before us. Matthew 10:1 through 8. And when he had called his 12 disciples to him, he gave them power over unclean spirits to cast them out and to heal all kinds of sickness and all kinds of disease. Now the names of the 12 apostles are these: first, Simon, who is called Peter, and Andrew his brother, James the son of Zebedee, and John his brother, Philip and Bartholomew, Thomas and Matthew the tax collector, James the son of Alphaeus, and Lebbaeus, whose surname was Thaddeus, Simon the Canaanite, and Judas Iscariot, who also betrayed him. These 12 Jesus sent out and commanded them, saying, Do not go into the way of the Gentiles, and do not enter a city of the Samaritans, but go rather to the lost sheep of the house of Israel. And as you go, preach, saying, The kingdom of heaven is at hand. Heal the sick, cleanse the lepers, raise the dead, cast out demons. Freely you have received, freely give.
There is so much packed into those 8 verses. The authority is given before the names are listed. Jesus does not give them a strategy. He gives them power.
And their assignment at this stage is specifically to the house of Israel. They are not yet going to the Gentiles or the Samaritans. That broader mission comes later. In this moment, the scope is focused.
And then the instructions continue through verse 15, covering things like how to find a worthy household, how to greet it, and what to do if they are not received. Let me read verses 9 through 14. Provide neither gold, nor silver, nor copper in your money belts, nor bag for your journey, nor 2 tunics, nor sandals, nor staffs. For a worker is worthy of his food. Now, whatever city or town you enter, inquire who in it is worthy, and stay there till you go out. And when you go into a household, greet it. If the household is worthy, let your peace come upon it. But if it is not worthy, let your peace return to you. And whoever will not receive you, nor hear your words, when you depart from that house or city, shake off the dust from your feet. Travel light, depend on hospitality, and do not force the message on those who refuse it. There is actually something very freeing about that last instruction. Shake the dust and move on.
And you are right that this is calibrated to their specific mission in that time and place. But what can we actually learn from it? The lesson points to a few things that carry across the centuries. The message itself, the kingdom of heaven is at hand, is still our message.
Just reframed for where we are in redemptive history. We are not announcing its nearness in the same way, but we are still ambassadors of the kingdom.
And the principle that a worker is worthy of his food, that is explicitly quoted in 1 Corinthians 9 and 1 Timothy 5 as a principle for supporting those in ministry. Paul draws directly on this passage.
So, even the logistical instructions carry theological weight that outlasts the immediate assignment.
There is also something profound in the phrase, freely you have received, freely give. The disciples did not earn the authority Jesus handed them. It was given, and that shapes how they are to share it, not as a commodity or a transaction.
Grace received becomes grace extended. That is a pattern that runs through the whole kingdom ethic.
Absolutely. All right, let us move to the second question. What is Jesus' instruction to future disciples in verses 16 through 23, and is it still relevant today?
This is where the chapter shifts its horizon. Jesus is still talking to the 12 physically in front of him, but his words begin to look beyond their immediate situation, towards something more encompassing and more dangerous.
Let me read verse 16 first. Behold, I send you out as sheep in the midst of wolves. Therefore, be wise as serpents and harmless as doves.
Sheep among wolves. That is not a comforting image if you are one of the sheep. And yet, Jesus does not say, avoid the wolves. He says, go to where the wolves are, but go wisely.
The pairing of wise as serpents and harmless as doves is one of the most memorable lines in Matthew. Shrewdness and innocence held together. Neither naivete nor cunning alone is sufficient.
You need both. The wisdom to navigate hostility and the purity of motive that does not retaliate or manipulate.
Then Jesus moves into what can feel like alarming territory. Verses 17 through 20. But beware of men, for they will deliver you up to councils and scourge you in their synagogues. You will be brought before governors and kings for my sake, as a testimony to them and to the Gentiles. But when they deliver you up, do not worry about how or what you should speak. For it will be given to you in that hour what you should speak. For it is not you who speak, but the Spirit of your Father who speaks in you.
There is a double movement there that is worth noting. First, the warning is real. Councils, scourging, governors, kings. This is not a comfortable assignment.
But then the promise is equally real. You will not be alone in that moment. The Spirit of the Father will speak through you. The very situation designed to silence the disciple becomes a platform.
That has been proven true throughout Christian history. Think of the testimonies given before emperors and courts and tribunals where ordinary believers spoke with extraordinary clarity.
And then verses 21 through 23 describe a kind of fracturing even within families and mention enduring to the end. Verse 22, and you will be hated by all for my name's sake, but he who endures to the end will be saved.
Verse 23 is interesting because it speaks of not having gone through all the cities of Israel before the Son of Man comes. That verse has generated a lot of discussion, but the lesson handles it by noting that some of these instructions are oriented toward disciples of the end times, a future tribulation context.
Which is consistent with the way Matthew often layers present and future in his eschatological passages. The words address the immediate audience, but have a longer reach.
And the question is this still relevant today? I think the answer has to be yes, and not just theoretically. Disciples in many parts of the world right now are being brought before authorities, are facing family division over faith, are needing the Spirit's words in real time.
The instruction to be wise as serpents and harmless as doves is not a first-century novelty. It is a perennial description of what faithful witness looks like in a hostile world.
And the promise that the Spirit will give you words in that hour, that is not suspended. That is still the confidence of every believer who has to speak up in a difficult situation.
Whether you are in a courtroom or a family dinner where someone challenges your faith, the principle holds. Prepared character, Spirit-given words.
I love that framing. Okay, question 3 is the densest one in some ways. What are the 5 central teachings Jesus has for present disciples in verses 24 through 42? And why are they important for our ministry today?
This section is where Jesus explicitly pivots back to the word disciple, mathetes, the learner. And the lesson identifies 5 distinct teachings in this block.
The first one comes right from verse 24. A disciple is not above his teacher, nor a servant above his master. Let me read verses 24 and 25. A disciple is not above his teacher, nor a servant above his master. It is enough for the disciple that he be like his teacher and the servant like his master. If they have called the master of the house Beelzebub, how much more will they call those of his household?
The goal is not to exceed the master. The goal is to be like him. That resets our ambition entirely. We are not trying to build our own kingdom. We are trying to reflect his.
And the implication is sobering. If they rejected Jesus, expect rejection too. The disciple does not get a different treatment from the world than the master received.
The second teaching is about fear, verses 26 through 28. Therefore, do not fear them, for there is nothing covered that will not be revealed, and hidden that will not be known. Whatever I tell you in the dark, speak in the light, and what you hear in the ear, preach on the housetops. And do not fear those who kill the body, but cannot kill the soul. But rather fear him who is able to destroy both soul and body in hell.
That is one of the most direct statements about the hierarchy of fear in all of Scripture. The fear of people, even people who can physically harm you, is subordinate to the fear of God.
And it is liberating, paradoxically. If the worst a person can do is take your body and your ultimate standing before God is not in their hands, then their threat is limited.
The message we carry is not ours to hoard out of self-protection. It belongs on housetops, in the light. We received it in the dark, in the quiet of discipleship, and it is meant to be spoken publicly.
The third teaching is about confessing Jesus before others. Verses 32 and 33. Therefore, whoever confesses me before men, him I will also confess before my Father, who is in heaven. But whoever denies me before men, him I will also deny before my Father, who is in heaven.
That is a hinge verse for the whole passage. There is a direct correspondence between how we acknowledge Jesus here and how he acknowledges us there.
And it is not just about crises. It is about the everyday pattern of whether Jesus is a private comfort or a public confession.
The fourth teaching moves into some of the most challenging territory. The idea that following Jesus may cause division, even within families. Verses 34 through 36. Do not think that I came to bring peace on earth. I did not come to bring peace, but a sword. For I have come to set a man against his father, a daughter against her mother, and a daughter-in-law against her mother-in-law. And a man's enemies will be those of his own household.
This verse is sometimes misread as if Jesus is endorsing conflict or division as a goal. But the point is that the call to take up a cross is so radical that it naturally distinguishes between those who embrace it and those who refuse it. The division is a consequence, not a strategy.
And verse 37 makes it even more personal. He who loves father or mother more than me is not worthy of me. And he who loves son or daughter more than me is not worthy of me.
The kingdom demands a reordering of all our loves, not the elimination of them, but their proper ordering. Jesus at the center, everything else held in relation to him.
The fifth teaching is about receiving the messengers of the King, verses 40 through 42. He who receives you receives me, and he who receives me receives him who sent me. He who receives a prophet in the name of a prophet shall receive a prophet's reward. And he who receives a righteous man in the name of a righteous man shall receive a righteous man's reward. And whoever gives one of these little ones only a cup of cold water in the name of a disciple, assuredly I say to you, he shall by no means lose his reward. This
is the flip side of the rejection warnings earlier in the chapter. Receiving a disciple is not a neutral act. It is tantamount to receiving Jesus himself and ultimately receiving the Father.
The ambassador carries the authority of the sovereign. When you receive the ambassador, you are relating to the king.
And then that extraordinary closing detail about the cup of cold water. Even the smallest act of hospitality toward a disciple, done in the name of discipleship, carries eternal weight.
Which is both encouraging and sobering. Encouraging because it says ordinary acts of support for the mission matter deeply. Sobering because it calls us to take seriously how we treat those who are carrying the message of the kingdom.
Now, why do these 5 things matter for ministry today? The lesson author says these are kingdom principles for disciples to meditate on and live by right now, in this time. They teach the weight and responsibility of our call, and also its limits.
I love that phrase, its limits. We are not called to be more than the Master. We are called to be like him. That is our ceiling and our calling.
Preach without fear of people, confess Jesus openly, understand that faithfulness may cost you, and know that even the smallest act of receiving a disciple is seen and rewarded. Those 5 threads form a complete picture of what it looks like to live out the mission.
And they are not just motivational. They are anchored in the character of the King. We confess him because he confesses us. We give freely because we received freely.
Now, we come to the 4th and final talk about it question, and it is the most personal one. What is your status as a disciple of Jesus, and how are you perpetuating the message of the King to others?
The lesson flags this as an open-ended question designed to invite honest, personal reflection. And I think that is the right spirit to bring to it.
It is worth sitting with the word status, not what are your credentials, not what is your ministry resume, but where are you right now in your journey as a learner, as a mathetes?
Because that is what a disciple is, first and foremost. Not someone who has arrived, but someone who is in the process of learning from Jesus, being shaped by him, walking behind him in the way.
And the question pairs status with perpetuation. Not just, where are you, but what is flowing from where you are to others?
That pairing matters because the whole chapter is about the movement not dying when the first generation passes. Jesus poured himself into 12, and those 12 poured into others. And here we are, 2,000 years later, still reading this text and being formed by it.
So the question to each listener is, where are you in that chain? Are you receiving the teaching? Are you passing it on?
And it does not have to be dramatic. Sometimes perpetuating the message looks like a cup of cold water, a word of encouragement, a conversation with a neighbor. The kingdom spreads through ordinary, faithful presence as much as through great public proclamation.
The lesson author urges us to share honestly and bravely about this. I think that is good counsel. It takes a certain kind of courage to say, I am not as far along as I thought I was, or to say, here is where I sense God calling me to step further out.
For me, this chapter is a reminder that the commission is not optional for disciples. We do not get to be permanent learners who never become sent ones. At some point, the mathetes becomes the apostolos.
The learner becomes the sent, right? And what equips that transition is everything Jesus pours into us in the learning season, the principles, the trust, the character formed over time.
I also think about the fact that Jesus did not wait until the disciples were perfect before sending them. They were still in formation when they went out. They came back and there was still so much they did not understand.
Which is both humbling and freeing. We do not have to have everything figured out before we are useful to the King. We have to be willing.
That is well said. All right. Let us close with the reflect on it prompt from the lesson, because it is beautiful and it deserves to land.
The lesson closes with this. Remarkably, Jesus shares his kingdom message with us. He shares his kingdom authority with us too. He calls us his disciples and sends us as apostles to be like him and to share with others the good news of his reign. What a powerful gift and responsibility that is.
What strikes me about that framing is the word remarkably. It is not presented as routine or expected. It is remarkable that the King of the universe would entrust his message and his authority to people like us.
People who, if we are honest, have denied him, doubted him, misunderstood him, and sometimes been more interested in our own comfort than in his mission.
And yet, he sends us anyway, not because we are qualified, but because he is sufficient, and he empowers those he sends.
The gift and the responsibility are inseparable. You cannot receive the gift of sharing in the King's mission and then decline the responsibility it carries.
Which might be the most searching question in this whole lesson. Have I accepted the gift and then quietly set aside the responsibility?
I think that is a question most of us need to sit with regularly, not once, but as an ongoing posture of examination. Am I treating the mission as something Jesus does while I watch, or am I genuinely participating?
Freely received, freely given. That is the rhythm Jesus established, and it is the rhythm we are invited into.
If this episode has stirred something in you about your own discipleship, about how you are participating in the perpetuation of the kingdom, we would encourage you to take that seriously. Sit with Matthew 10 this week. Read through all 42 verses slowly.
Notice which section speaks most directly to where you are right now. Are you in the past apostles section, just receiving the basics of how to go? Are you in the future disciples section, navigating real opposition? Or are you in the present disciple section, wrestling with fear and confession and what it costs to follow?
All of it is for us, in different ways and different seasons.
Coming up next time, we move into Lesson 6, where we will continue tracing Matthew's portrait of Jesus and the shape of his kingdom. The narrative is building towards some important confrontations and revelations, and we do not want you to miss it.
Thank you so much for studying with us today. We believe this word is alive, and that the King whose kingdom it describes is alive too, and still sending, still empowering, still calling learners to become the sent.
We will see you next time. Keep learning from the King.